Okay, if we are all set, I think that I can start doing some introductions. Jackie, I don't think that we can see you on video. So if you're able to see if you can get back on video before we get started, that'd be wonderful. But in the meantime, I can say hello to everyone and kick this off. My name is Jessica Payne. I'm Director of Community Programs at the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, and the CMBA is one of the partner organizations that runs Reach Out for nonprofits, along with our partner, the Federal Bar, Northern District of Ohio. Reach Out has been in existence since 2012. This is the first year that we have debuted this form of programming, which is Reach Out Live, coming to you over Zoom. We've had a lot of good meetings and presentations this way, beginning since this last spring. So I definitely encourage you to check out the Reach Out page of the Bar Association's website. I'll post that in the chat for video links to our past Reach Out presentations. But we're so glad that you're with us today. We're very, very excited to have Beth Short with us, and I'll let Jackie do the intro for Beth from the Ohio Attorney General's office. We like to do this to have sort of our check-in and view from the Ohio AG's office once a year for our volunteers and also for any nonprofits joining us. It's definitely an important perspective. Just a little bit of housekeeping on our end. Reach Out is open to all volunteer attorneys who are looking to give back to their local nonprofit community, as well as any nonprofit leaders in the greater Northeast Ohio area who would like to learn more about their legal situation, possibly get a little legal help, and just get some really good education on important things that you need to know. For any attorneys that are here or CLE credit, we will have a survey that will email you later in the day. Just make sure that you check your email and complete that survey. It should just take a minute online, and that way we'll make sure that we get you your CLE credit for this. With that, I'm going to check in with Jackie again. Jackie, can you hear me?
Yes, can you see me?
I can't see you, unfortunately, but we can hear you, so that's great.
I may have to log back in and then out. But hi, it's my pleasure to introduce Beth Short, who handles outreach and education for the Ohio Attorney General Charitable Law section. She is an avid enthusiast for nonprofit organizations. Her passion's evident by her professional and volunteer background as a staff member, board member, consultant, and volunteer for nonprofit organizations. I'll turn it over to Beth now. We've had a wonderful conversation about what's happening COVID-wise, so I hope we can ignore my internet connection, but continue on with Beth.
All right, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be invited to be a part of this. I think it's a wonderful program and a wonderful opportunity for those of us who care about the charitable sector to kind of focus our thoughts and get together and discuss things that maybe we ought to be thinking about as it applies specifically to organizations we might be working with. But I wonder if, before we jump right in, if people might be willing to, can they use the chat feature? Does that work?
Yes.
Could people take a few minutes and just type in what kind of groups you're working in or for, just to get an idea of who all's out there. And while you're doing that, I'm going to talk about some specific COVID related issues that we are seeing. So we have in our office, created by the Ohio Administrative Code, we have a charitable advisory council that is comprised of folks from throughout the charitable sector with various types of background. And since this whole thing called coronavirus changed all of our worlds, they've been very concerned about the impact on the charitable sector. And some of the members of our advisory council have really wanted to, be in touch with what's going on and whether there are things that we can be doing from the Attorney General's office to help. So in partnership with the Ohio Association of Nonprofit Organizations, the statewide Association for Foundations, Philanthropy Ohio, and a wonderful OSU professor named Aaron Beaton, who's on our advisory council. We did a statewide survey of charities in April, and the report was issued May 4th. We had over 8,000 charities respond to a survey that asked, what's going on with your charity? What changes have you made? How concerned are you about the impact of coronavirus? And there were issues that I had guessed that the level of concern about coronavirus would increase over time. I was wrong, because the concern of charities in the survey indicated they're already at a stage 11. So they immediately recognized that this was going to be something that was serious. And many of them cut back their services or eliminated services. And so we had numbers about that sort of thing. We just last week or the week before posted round 2 of the survey. And it's online, looks like this, which gives far more details about where charities are at this point in terms of we have, no surprise, a lot of charities who have both had negative financial impact, but have had the need for increased services, particularly those in social service areas. Problems managing volunteers. Folks, I noticed we have someone from the arts area. Obviously, arts groups have been paralyzed in a very harmful way. So this survey, if it provides any comfort to know you're not alone, you'll find that the impact is huge. And we also asked questions about how many had used some of the various PPP loans, for instance. Our hope was that this would be helpful also, this survey, not only for charities, but also for funders. And I know that the co-sponsors of this report have shared it with policymakers to encourage them to be really mindful of the needs of charities when they're developing COVID recovery policies and plans. And indeed, they just at the state level released plans for a grant, COVID related CARES funding grant program that the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services is going to be administering. And I believe November 27th, I think, maybe the deadline for applications that just went up last week. As they finalized that, they're going to be granting $25 million to charities that serve low-income Ohioans. The grant funds can cover like unemployment, those sorts of things. So if you're working with organizations where that might be helpful, please be mindful of that and check it out. Let me see if I can figure out my share screen thing and get that working. Are you all seeing one screen with one PowerPoint on it? A miracle. So I also want to take the opportunity to run through some of the very basics that it's always helpful to be mindful of. One of the things we have been concerned about related to coronavirus specifically, first of all, we know not every group is going to make it through. We know that there are businesses that will not survive. The same is true of charities. Some of the national folks that comment on issues affecting the sector guess anywhere from 8 to 40% of charities may go out of business eventually, depending on whenever we're done with this painful coronavirus thing. So a big concern for us is charities where the leaders thought, wow, stay at home, that means take a vacation. Whew, don't have to worry about charitable issues right now, but it became a time where people needed to be doing even more work than ever before, thinking strategically as board leaders within the organization about how do we respond to this challenge? How do we continue managing what we have? How do we need to adjust programs, services, make adjustments for staff, for volunteers? Certainly, sitting back and seeing this as a multi-month vacation is not going to be helpful. And so we immediately also started trying to provide resources and webinars and position papers with information that we thought would be helpful to folks in the charitable world. So some of that's going to be included in what I'm going to quickly run through. So let's jump in. So we do call our basic board governance training Minding the Business While Changing the World, because many times folks are involved with a group because they're passionate about the cause or about the programs they offer. But passion and spirit doesn't really it's not sufficient enough. You have important legal obligations when you're on the board or a key leader of a charity. And if you fail to live up to those legal obligations that, you know, the whole system rests upon these leaders doing their jobs properly, and if they don't do that, it really can jeopardize the ongoing future of the organization, which, you know, people who rely on your programs are greatly impacted by. So while you might be changing the world in wonderful ways, you still have to pay attention to the business-like requirements that come with the responsibility of being a charitable leader. But those of us in the charitable law section, we all have family members who benefit from all the wonderful programming that is provided by our charitable sector. We know that it doesn't come easily. It doesn't magically happen when charitable organizations are functioning. It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And so we have a great amount of respect and appreciation for the work that goes into running charities and running them in the proper way. And although we are the regulators of the section, people sometimes think that that means we hate kittens and babies and cute things, but we do have hearts, and we know that the quality of all of our lives is enhanced by charitable organizations and their work. And so we always started out with respect and appreciation for the work that goes into things. So one of our operational mottos is we're trying to help good people do good things the right way. And so we have resources that we try to provide that we hope are useful, such as trainings like this. Back in the old days, I used to travel around the state and would do live trainings, and I cannot wait for that to return. So for now, we're doing things by Zoom. We just this summer launched a new web page, a new website, charitable.ohioago.gov. And we got feedback from folks that the Attorney General's webpage was pretty vast and folks had trouble finding our stuff. So we now have our own website where you can find everything related to charitable operations at that one spot. So that was an exciting thing to launch this summer during, while we were all still figuring out how long will this last. But making resources more readily available is something that we'll never be done doing. I suggest that every charitable leader take a look at our two best-selling publications, and they're available on the website. One is Guide for Charity Board Members, and the other is Avoiding Theft in Your Nonprofit. And I think those two publications can kind of bring you to a focused point and remind yourself periodically, are we on track? Are we doing these? Do we need to make improvements in the way we're doing some things for the good of the organization? Because sometimes you're just running as fast as you can to keep up with the regular stuff that goes on from day to day, but sometimes it's a good thing to stop and focus yourself. There are pre-recorded versions of this board governance training. So if you're having trouble sleeping, you can listen to me talk about conflict of interest at 2 a.m, and maybe that would be helpful. But we do find that a number of organizations decide to watch the training together at a board meeting and then talk about issues that came up that they might want to think about doing differently. Or sometimes groups will say, hey, everybody watch this webinar prior to our meeting next Tuesday. And we'll see if there are things we ought to do. I do a live board governance training on the first Wednesday of every month at noon. And there's also a live charitable registration training on the third Wednesday at noon. We are also in the midst of developing additional webinars that we're going to be posting that have to do with financial reporting and some of those things that we often see as problematic in the charities that we're taking a close look at. And so that may be in the first quarter of next year. So if you have suggestions of things that might be helpful, we would love to hear it. So take a look and give us a grade and drop me an email. And let me give you all my direct email. It's beth.short@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. While we can't give you legal advice, we can try to point you in the right direction with things. So if you have an issue that comes up, or if you have suggestions for us, please drop me an email. Many folks are surprised to learn that the AG is involved in the charitable world, but it's actually the oldest responsibility of the Attorney General. And it dates back to, the good old days in jolly old England in the medieval times. And many times people would leave behind money for orphans, for instance, in the village. And sometimes the trustees got the money to the orphans in the village. And sometimes instead of helping the orphans, they helped themselves and bought, shinier suits of armor or faster horses or something like that, whatever they spent funny money on back then. So in 1601, they developed the Statute of Charitable Uses. And it says that the Attorney General shall have the authority to stand in the shoes of the beneficiaries and force the trustees to do the right thing. And so that's actually the lens through which we do our work. It's did those who were supposed to benefit, or did someone else? So we're thinking about veterans, children, cancer patients, whoever the mission of the organization is intended to be helping. That's the lens that we take when we approach our cases. And so we have this common law authority through the aegis that we've inherited, and then the General Assembly has given us additional authority to do our work. When we talk about the charitable world in Ohio, we're talking about this big, vast array of all kinds of groups. They can be massive and multi-million-dollar organizations with hundreds of employees, or they can be also very small grassroots with practically no resources, certainly no staff. Think about maybe a grandmother's reading club in a local park, helping children to develop a love of reading. And so it can be anywhere on the whole continuum in terms of complexity. But whether you're on the board of the Cleveland Clinic Foundation or the Grandmother's Reading Club, your responsibilities as a board member are identical. I often find that it is helpful to run through the various governmental entities that are normally involved on an ongoing basis in the operation of your charities. So if there was a new high school built up in your area called Anywhere High School, one of the things they're probably going to do is start a brand new athletic booster club. So those that want to establish this group, the first step is generally going to be going to the Secretary of State, which handles all filings for anyone doing business in the state of Ohio. And we're going to try to incorporate Anywhere Athletic Booster Club. And assuming no one else has a name of a group like that, they're going to give us our articles of incorporation. Every 5 years, we're going to need to file a continued existence statement with the Secretary of State to tell them we're still in business. Don't let anyone else use the name. I suggest that every board member, every year at the beginning of your program year, go into the Secretary of State's page, look up your group, make sure it says you're still an active incorporation, and it'll list the year that filing's due. So if you check every year, you're not going to miss that filing. The other thing that we're going to have to let the Secretary of State know is who is our statutory agent. And that's someone who's going to take all the official mail or correspondence or contacts that might be needed in the ongoing course of business. Many times people realize that their statutory agent is someone who died 8 years ago. So when you go in each year to check if it's your magic year to do the filing, make sure your statutory agent is someone that's still a good contact point for your organization. Next, you go to the IRS and you're going to get an EIN, a federal employee identification number, and that's going to be this unique number that will follow you forevermore. That takes about 4 minutes. The thing that takes more effort with the Internal Revenue Service is seeking tax exempt status. They're the only ones that can determine whether a group is tax exempt. There are multiple different types of tax exempt organizations. So the credit union is tax exempt. The Elks Club is tax exempt. Homeowners associations are tax exempt. But what we're specifically interested in is a 501c3. And to be a 501c3, which is the only type of tax exempt group where you can make deductible contributions, you're going to have to convince the IRS that this is a general community purpose, your organization, and it can't be for personal benefits. So I could set up a foundation to give scholarships to my family members, but that would not pass the 501c3 test. If instead, because that's too limited of a group, and it's more of a personal benefit as opposed to a wide community one. However, if I set up a foundation to fund scholarships for graduates from Marion County, my hometown, that would be suitable for a 501c3 tax exempt group, because there's an undefined group of beneficiaries, like no one really knows. It doesn't have to be people with last name of short. So generally, we will be able to easily explain to the IRS the purpose of our booster group, which is to help enhance the educational experiences of all the students within the Anywhere High School building. One thing I should note here is that all groups need to go through this process to get their tax exempt status, unless you're an exclusively religious organization. So if you're a church, temple, synagogue, mosque, you don't need to do these filings with the IRS. You can, there's a presumption of eligibility. So you also don't have to do filings called 990s that every other charity is going to have to do. So our Anywhere booster every year is going to have to be doing a 990 filing, and depending on the size and complexity of our group, we'll have to be providing more or less information. And then finally, and by the way, if I'm on the board, every year I'm going to go to irs.gov. I'm going to go to the exempt organizations listing, type in the EIN in my group, and make sure it still says that I'm in good standing with the IRS and that gifts are tax deductible. The final thing I'm going to do in terms of my ongoing filings is file with the Ohio Attorney General's office. This responsibility has been going on since 1951. It's not new, and most states have some form of charitable registration on the state level because there's kind of a bifurcated system set up for enforcement. The requirements in each state differ, and if you're doing operations or fundraising in multiple states, you're going to want to know what their requirements are. If you're on the border with another state, you definitely need to know what those obligations are. In the state of Ohio, it's any Ohio charity and any charity that solicits Ohioans needs to do a filing with us, and you need to do your first filing within six months of formation or prior to starting soliciting. So that's an online process, and I'll quickly show you that in a moment. You need to do this filing each year, and you can go into our page and type in the name of a group, and it will tell you if the group is compliant with their requirements. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So these three governmental entities you're going to maintain ongoing connections with and have ongoing responsibilities too. And again, this is a simple check that, in 5 minutes, if you're on the board at the beginning of the program, you go in and see what it says about your group. Make sure you're getting, green lights at each level. This is what we unfortunately spend a lot of our time responding to, are thefts, embezzlements, some sort of fraudulent activities that go on within charities. I am I did not check in advance, but I am certain this has happened in the Cleveland area. I don't think that Cuyahoga County is immune from the human condition. When this happens, here's what the general story is. It's someone that was very involved with the organization, who people trusted, people who are crushed to learn that this individual has done harm to the group that you, along with others, were committed to doing. Shocked beyond belief that this could have happened. If you're on the board, it's something that you feel a little bit guilty on when this happened on your watch. Often there's financial damage that can't be recovered. There's not going to be restitution, and sometimes there's a reputational loss to the organization when this happens. This is the kind of thing that you'd never want your name in the paper for. You want it in the paper for the great work you're doing, and this sort of thing is painful. What we find routinely when these situations occur is a board that has been asleep at the wheel. They have often invested trust in a way that was dangerous. Trust is not an internal control. And job number one of being a board member is developing processes and procedures that prevent this sort of thing from happening, or allow it to be discovered very quickly if it does happen. You're the first line of defense to protect those charitable assets that have been entrusted to you. And so sometimes we find that Mrs. Smith has been involved as the treasurer for years and years. You don't want to insult her by suggesting that other people should be involved in doing the treasurer's role. And next thing you know, you learn of a substance abuse problem, a mental health problem, gambling, financial things that go on behind the closed doors of Ohio families all across the state that we never know about, that sometimes only come to light when things like this happen. So it is the board that must make sure that there are processes in place to protect you. So I was elected treasurer at my church. At my church, once you're elected treasurer, the only way to get out of it is to move or to die. And I did not want to be the life appointee. I also wanted people to know how seriously I took the job. I would rather make a mistake that hurt my family than hurt the church. I didn't want people to say, oh, Beth and John just took a lovely vacation. Of course, she is this treasurer of the church. I wonder if that's how she did it. I didn't want any of that. And we didn't really have too many processes set up in a firm way. And so we spent time deciding, what does it look like to do the treasurer's job in a responsible way? So we decided that every month before the Council of Ministries member meeting, I was going to put together a report that had various financial information in it. But before it went to the council, it was going to be double checked by 2 of 5 people who had access to our online banking records. So they would go in, they would verify that what I had reported was accurate. There weren't unreported transactions. They would be able to tell me if I'd made a mistake. And that is the only way to gain some measure of comfort that your financial dealings are being handled in a safe way, is to have multiple people involved. You must have multiple people involved. And with online banking, it's easier than ever. One thing we do find that folks sometimes overlook is with the multiplication of various online formats and platforms for raising funds. Some folks, maybe you want to do your Anywhere booster membership drive through GoFundMe or something like that. You got to think about those being just like bank accounts, because to just have one person in charge of those formats is also an invitation for trouble. So treat those just like you would the bank accounts, and double check that indeed the group is going to be benefiting from everything. So what those policies do is they protect the organization, they protect the people doing these important jobs, and it also helps with continuity, because guess what? I'm no longer the treasurer at my church. In fact, many people have stepped forward to do this role because it didn't feel like They had to start from scratch. It felt like everyone was in on it, that, you know, we had talked about how this ought to be done in a safe way. It is heartbreaking to me, because one of my jobs is to follow up sometimes when we see these headlines and we haven't been involved in the case. I'll often call, like, for instance, there's a very small town that you go through on the way to Youngstown. It's basically a bend in the curb of a state highway. That church lost $200 and some thousand to their secretary. And I called the pastor, well, how did this happen? What exactly did she do? And he said, well, she transferred funds from the bank account to her account. I said, well, did she use, you know, fake vendors, you know, fake bills or something like that? No, she just transferred funds from the bank account to her personal account. If one other person had been checking, they would have noticed that transaction and would have asked about it, because there should be documentation, because when you're with a charitable organization, you need to be doing things in a way that you can keep records and know that everything that's being spent is approved and meets the mission of the organization. So invest some time in doing things the right way, because it buys you a whole lot of comfort in sleeping at night. The Avoiding Theft publication that I mentioned has 20 some ideas of processes that you might want to consider with your organization. Take a look, see which ones make sense. Do we have any questions about that?
Beth, can you hear me?
Yes.
So there have been a few questions just coming in on, you know, a lot of our nonprofits are in financial distress, and you're talking about checks and balances here. And some of the thoughts might be, do you dissolve your entity, and what happens then with remaining money? Meaning you're not thinking as a board that you're going to be able to continue on with the mission and securing funding, and maybe that's the most prudent course of action. Or some of the nonprofits might be thinking, yay, here's another nonprofit with a similar mission. Can we work together and somehow merge our two nonprofits together? You know, looking at the finances particularly and being a good steward, how are you seeing that in the current COVID, you know, stress of the financials impacting our nonprofits?
So you have a very smart group of people who have jumped ahead several slides. Indeed. So back in 2008, when we had the financial crash, there were many people who were observers of the sector who said, we foresee a whole lot of mergers happening as a result of the financial difficulties. Guess what? It didn't happen. Doing mergers may well be the most effective thing to do within a particular area. You know, take a look at your emergency food network. How many pantries do you need in Cuyahoga County? Sometimes you have some that are just operated one Thursday a month, and another one might be, you know, one Monday a month. Is there a way to bring them together to share on administrative expenses and efforts? But that requires overcoming sometimes a lot of ego issues. We did a particular, if you look on our new webpage, under our COVID resources, we put together a webinar specifically about some of those kinds of transaction issues that might come up. So dissolving a charity, depending on what the assets are, you may need to do, may need to reach out in advance to our office if you're going to be selling off, for instance, property or 50% of your assets. That requires a notice to our office. So you'll find that information in that particular webinar. The webinar covers dissolutions, mergers, transactions, and use of restricted funds. So those are 4 things that we thought would be perhaps come up in conversations. When do you go out of business? That is a hard thing for boards to go through. Boards don't enjoy going out of business unless you're a cancer organization and they finally cure cancer. Then you celebrate going out of business. That's not what we're generally looking at. As a matter of fact, just last week, I was looking at our numbers. We have not had an increase in dissolutions or charities going out of business. In fact, the rate of establishing new charities has not changed through this entire, the last 8 months. And the new charities that have opened have not been specifically related to coronavirus. So in many ways, on the numbers question, we haven't seen an impact yet. But this is going to be something that as time goes on, I'm afraid many charities are going to have to face. There's going to be an ongoing need for the booster club at Anywhere High School. But I'll tell you a group that my heart aches for, and that's arts organizations who haven't been able to do the things that, you know, they do. They haven't been able to sell tickets, which help pay the mortgage for the theater they manage, and haven't been able to have events in that thing. So the entire economic model has collapsed for some organizations. Right now, there are, you know, the various PPP programs and CARES programs that I hope everybody is looking at. But you may well decide that merging with someone else is the key way to, you know, continue to allow your special programming to go forward. Or maybe you just go out of business. If they close Anywhere High School, then we're going to fold up shop. Now, when you fold up shop, you need to be mindful of how you handle your charitable assets. One thing that is definitely not okay is to start dealing around the table, you know, like let's give $1,000 to everyone on the board to get rid of this account that we still have. Absolutely not. That would be an inappropriate personal benefit. Once funds are charitable in nature, they're always charitable in nature. So there will generally be language in your bylaws. And if there's not, you can reach out to our office, but you have to maintain and protect the charitable nature of any funds that are going to be coming up and being used. If you're merging with another organization, you just transfer to the surviving organization. If you're going out of business, maybe there's a partner organization you've been working with. Maybe it says specifically in your bylaws who gets it. We do have problems with that periodically from time to time. Another issue that along the same lines is many people have accepted and received restricted gifts, where someone sets up at Anywhere High School through the booster group a scholarship program, and they're going to award 3 scholarships every year to an athlete with good grades going to college. And then you start having troubles paying the bills for other things. Not okay to dip into the restricted funds and use them for something else. There is a process that you can go through to ask to be relieved from those duties, and that requires coming to our office and often going to court. So take a look at that webinar, because we have we've put together what we think might be the most common things that might come up in thinking when you're talking about big changes within your charity. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. I posted a link to the charitable webinars, charitable.ohioago.gov/charitable-webinars. Beth, I actually didn't see on there some of these webinars that you're mentioning.
So those that are related specifically to COVID are under a special tab for COVID.
Okay. That would be under the COVID guidance on the Maine Attorney General webpage.
No, it's on our webpage, but there's a separate coronavirus page. In fact, it's on the carousel. There's a big picture of a coronavirus. If you hit that, you'll see the various webinars and publications we did that are specific to coronavirus issues.
Great, thank you.
So as I mentioned, we get complaints every day with people who have concerns about the operations of a charity, and it could be an employee, could be a donor, could be a beneficiary, it could be a board member. We license bingo, and sometimes we get complaints they were not nice to me last Tuesday night at bingo. We're going to respond a lot differently to that than to a complaint that comes from a board member who says, I've routinely asked for financial reports, and the executive director and the treasurer refused to share information with us. We're going to take that one very seriously. So we have lawyers, compliance examiners, investigators, and accountants, and the results of an investigation really vary based on what we find. So we may do a look and quickly determine there's no evidence to support what was raised in the allegation, close it, and move on to something else. We may find that while we can't establish what was alleged, what we do find is a group that has not gotten its board governance practices to a place where it should be. And so we'll provide technical support to try to get them operational with internal controls, with the board actually doing its responsibilities. Sometimes we have to file suit, and we'll file suit to recover misappropriated funds, to remove people from a board, to maybe even shut the charity down. And then sometimes we work in cooperation with local law enforcement on criminal consequences. So the results can really vary based on what we find. This is what the online charitable registration system looks like. Every year, go in, type in the name of your organization or the EIN, and make sure that when you look up your group, there's going to be a box of information. And this particular question, is the organization's registration status current? Yes or no? Hopefully it always says yes. Many times foundations, United Ways, government entities will not release funds to organizations that don't say yes. We always suggest that at least 3 people with the organization have an account in our system. If you have an account in our system and you link yourself to an organization, we will send email reminders whenever a filing is due. We'll send you a copy of anything that is filed on behalf of your organization, so multiple people can be in the know of what's going on. If it happens to say no here in this box, if you have an account, you can simply go to the to-do page and it'll tell you what's missing. So, you know, oftentimes Mrs. Smith is the one that always did the filings, and she finally retires to Florida and things start falling through the cracks. But if you have at least 3 people, you know things aren't going to fall through the cracks with those reminders. I'm going to quickly run through some of the provisions that statutorily folks may want to know about. 109 is Ohio's Charitable Trust Act. It defines what constitutes a charitable trust, which would need to register with us. And it doesn't matter if you're incorporated, doesn't matter if you're tax exempt or not. Any entity that is holding assets that are to be used for a charitable, religious, or educational purpose, you've now bought yourself a charitable trust. And so you are honor bound to follow the same rules that everyone else does in terms of making good use of those assets. So it could even be a for-profit business. Clearly, all 501c3s are charitable trusts. But what we find sometimes are scammers who think that, you know, if they avoid filing with the IRS or incorporating, they can pretend to be a charity, fly under the radar, and rip people off. And so if you're walking like a duck and talking like a duck, you better behave like a duck, or we'll have jurisdiction to come make you use those resources, those charitable trust resources that have been entrusted to you in the proper way. This language also creates the ability for us to do enforcement actions, and it also involves us then in certain types of litigation and in certain transactions. So when you're selling off significant assets, real property will get you in this category quite quickly, determined based on what kind of group you are. You need to provide us with notice. That's all outlined in that webinar that's under the coronavirus things on our webpage. The Solicitation Act is at 1716, and it applies anytime anything of value, which is usually money, but it could be used furniture, used clothing, buying a ticket to a benefit concert, a spaghetti dinner, selling refreshments at the community festival to support a local scholarship effort. Those all fall under the Charitable Solicitation Act. And here's the basic shortcut that many people find complicated. If you're raising money, you're not allowed to lie. So this prohibits misleading people and making fraudulent use of funds that folks believe have been invested in a particular charitable purpose. 1702, the Nonprofit Corporation Law. This makes great bedtime reading. However, like I have undersold 1702 for years because this has come in so handy during the coronavirus. So 1702 has various things in it about how we expect charitable or nonprofit organizations rather to operate. It says, for instance, that you have to have at least 3 board members. Well, there's default language in 1702 for issues that come up that might not be included in the bylaws of an organization. This was a huge thing when coronavirus first hit, because 1702 says that unless the bylaws of an organization specifically prohibit it, you can do board meetings by Zoom or by Facebook Live or any of these other platforms, which allowed organizations to continue to be doing their governance work now more than ever. So 1702, if you have questions because something's not clearly outlined, take a look at 1702 and see if there's default language to speak to it. We had very few organizations that had language that specifically prohibited meetings by these various online platforms. And for those that did, we were able to work with them to come up with something sensible to get through the emergency that COVID-19 became. So while I used to always kind of poo-poo 1702, I'm now a big fan. It wasn't that I wasn't a fan. It has good information. It's always been good, but it's just become particularly helpful during this time that we're all trying to figure our way through. We license bingo, which I mentioned earlier. A license is always required whenever you're raising funds for bingo. So even if it's a one-time bingo event, even if it's a purse bingo, it requires a license. The license covers, the traditional B4 062. It also includes instant bingo, which are kind of lottery-like ticket things that you crack the back on, and it tells you if you're a winner. We have seen many people trying to be creative in replacing fundraising activities, and so you should know that online bingo is not permissible. It's not that long ago that Ohio was a non-gambling state for casinos and racinos. And the Ohio General Assembly had carved out a number of gaming related things in our non-gambling state for charitable organizations. Bingo was one of them. It requires a license. Another thing, raffles are included in 2915 as an exemption to our anti-gambling thing. We get questions every day about raffles. I cannot raffle off my husband's antique motorcycle saying that I want to support breast cancer research. That would be an illegal raffle. If I went to the Stephanie Spielman Foundation, which funds breast cancer research and services at the James Cancer Hospital at Ohio State, and they're interested in doing that, and it becomes their raffle, that is a permissible raffle. So it has to be owned, it has to be run and overseen by a charity. Otherwise, it's an illegal raffle. So people and businesses are not permitted to have raffles unless they're doing it under the oversight of a charity. 2915 also permits charities to have gaming nights, casino nights, but there are very specific requirements in there. You can't have it at a hotel or a restaurant. You can only hold them at a facility owned by the charity or leased from a government or veteran organization. There are limitations on how often they can be done. And whatever you do, don't play craps and roulette. I don't know why something horrible must happen, but the General Assembly specifically prohibits it. So if you're going to do those kinds of activities, be sure you're doing them in the proper way. Raffles, also you can sell tickets online electronically, but you have to choose the winner from drawing from a random receptacle of the tickets. The thing to know is that 2915 is part of Chapter 29, Ohio's Criminal Code. So violations of 2915 can be cited by any local law enforcement official. The Ohio Charitable Law section, we're not the bingo police. We have no criminal authority at all. So when you do things incorrectly, it can result in criminal citations from township police, sheriffs, municipal police. So it's important to do it right because you don't know what the consequences might be. 2915 is in there between, drug trafficking and murder. I don't know exactly where it rests, but it is in the criminal code. So it's important to do these things the right way if you're going to engage in those. And some people have tried to be very creative during coronavirus in doing things that 2915 prohibits.
Beth, one of my questions I have for you is, sometimes people just want to raise funds for a cause. They're feeling charitably motivated. They aren't necessarily known to any of the board members, but they're thinking, let's use one of these charities' names. We're going to donate any proceeds to this charity. What might a board do when they find this out? Say, well, thanks for the donation, but we don't want you doing this in the future, using our name without our permission and running kind of this unknown charitable solicitation to other Ohio constituents. We are not part of it. We're not running it. It's not part of us, but it's some good wishing individuals trying
sometimes it's well-intentioned and sometimes it's not, frankly. And so people out in the public can't recognize the difference. So 1716 requires you to have written permission from a charity to make use of their name. So for instance, I can't do the auction, the raffle for my husband's motorcycle, not only because it's a violation of the 2915, but it's also a violation of 1716, the Solicitation Act, if I'm not in advance getting permission and the charity has the authority to oversee what's going on. And charities should be monitoring how folks are making use of their name if they are, and they immediately should reach out and say, let's talk about this. And you are perfectly free to say, no, don't do that. If you have problems in that area, that would be a perfect thing to file a complaint to my office about. We sometimes have to intervene in those cases in which someone is taking advantage of the generosity of others in a fraudulent way. Also, boards can make decisions about what kinds of funds they're willing to accept and what kinds of activities. So I used to work for the American Cancer Society. I was the Ohio Marketing and Communications Director. They have a very firm process not to accept tobacco-related money. So for instance, there's a large Kraft Foods warehouse in Columbus. They were part of the Philip Morris umbrella. They didn't accept any money from that. They were very serious about it. And so we would have very passionate volunteers all over the state doing things for their Relay for Life team, which, great. But one of them wanted to do a cancer smoke out at a Toledo tobacco shop. And so I had to call and say, sorry, but the American Cancer Society logo does not go next to logo for tobacco shop. Big no-no. Thanks, but no thanks. We also had someone that wanted to do a topless car wash to raise money for breast cancer research. Again, American Cancer Society logo does not go next to topless car wash. So charities have an obligation to monitor that sort of thing, and they have every right to control how the use of their name will be made, and that you can then also make sure that you're going to benefit from the proceeds that are raised, and you know how the money's going to be handled and reported.
Beth, we're kind of approaching our end of the hour.
I know. Let me show you just very quickly. And for those who are attorneys, fiduciary duties are nothing new. They apply in every area. I do this training sometimes for an entire day long training. So I get very excited. There's lots to talk about, but that booklet will outline what it looks like when you're living up to your duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty to maintain accounts, and your duty of compliance. So take a look at those. Were there any other questions that came up?
I don't know my hands right now, so you can continue.
Well, you have my email address. It's beth.short@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. Let me know if things come up that we might be helpful in giving you some hints or tips, because we appreciate so much the activities of folks that are doing good things to make the world better, particularly during this crazy time that we're all living in. So did we touch on some of the high points that?
Yes, there actually was something else on more related to employment issues. So for instance, if there's need to be a reduction in staff, and what I know we've been handling this from kind of a board of directors point of view, but is there anything else that nonprofits should be
Well,
looking
those are really important issues, and there are so many different complications involved in some of those. So council can be very helpful when charities are sorting their way through that. And we do not pretend to be experts on employment law, but there are those out there who can help folks.
Right. Jessica Payne just posted a link to one of our to our Reach Out past webinars on nonprofit law employment issues that we've touched upon this year. Also, there was a question that came in about the timing for notice to the AG's office for mergers, dissolutions, and how quickly are those being turned around. I know you mentioned earlier that you haven't seen an uptick, so I'm just wondering on what your perception is from that.
No, we haven't seen an uptick yet. And I'm in regular communications with folks in other states, and neither have they. We also expected to see a lot more fraud related to fundraising for coronavirus relief. And we are shocked that we haven't seen that. So often when there's disasters, it becomes an invitation for some scammers to come in. And we haven't seen that on a national basis either. So we're keeping our fingers crossed because there's far too many needs and not nearly enough resources to respond to it. So we can't allow them to be leaking out of the sector in a way that's they're not helping people.
Great. Well, I'll let you continue on. I'll jump in if there are any more questions.
How much longer do we have? My clock shows it's after 11.
Jessica, can you tell us how much longer we have? Maybe.
Well, we technically go to 11, but if there's anybody who wants to stay on, and Beth, you want to talk a little bit more or answer any other questions, we're fine going a couple of minutes over.
Well, how about if I stop sharing screen and then I can see things more readily. And see, you guys have done such great work before. You have all kinds of resources for people. That's wonderful. Yeah, so I guess the other thing that I will make a plea for is, you know, we are the regulators. We have a certain role to indeed protect all those resources out there, but we also want to do as much as we can to help support charities, and that's why we do training and that sort of thing, so that folks don't have to meet the investigators in my office. I'm far more delightful than our investigators. And so helping prevent problems helps everyone. So if you're seeing things of concern and you think checking in with our office could be helpful, I hope that you'll think of us as being a ready resource.
In my experience, everybody there is ready, willing, and able to answer questions you may have on hypotheticals, how you might go through, you know, on the dissolution and notices or registration questions too.
Yeah, because I mean, as I said, we all have favorite charities who have been very meaningful in the lives of our families, and they provide, you know, critical services. So we appreciate all the work that goes into it.
Well, thank you. If there are no other questions, just want to thank Beth for Zooming with us today and for participating. This is our last Reach Out seminar for this year. And Jessica, I think we'll send out the survey link at the end for any credit, and then That's it. Thank you. If you have any suggestions or recommendations for future presentations, please let us know. Beth gave us our contact information, and I know the AG would love to similarly hear what Ohio's nonprofit organizations need.
So just a couple of quick notes again. Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you, Jackie, for your time today. That was an incredible presentation. Hope everyone learned as much as I did. Housekeeping, we will send out the survey for everyone taking this for CLE credit. And any of you who are either artists or arts organizations or attorneys looking to help guide those groups, we will have our Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts has a presentation on December 3rd on the basics of intellectual property and some real life applications. It's been in the emails we sent out, but please do feel free to email me at that address that I listed, and if you would like further information and how to register and sign up. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.